Hey guys, MrPokke here, back with another video. Today, we are finally going through Imbibitor Lunae's Eidolon 2, Imperium on Cloud 9. This Eidolon, in my honest opinion, it is the best Eidolon that we have ever seen across the entire Honkai style characters, be it Eidolon 1 or even Eidolon 6. This Eidolon just gives so much damage potential to Imbibitor Lunae, on top of the fact that he is currently our strongest DPS, that I believe it warrants a video of itself to talk about exactly how his Eidolon 2 increases his damage potential, his team building capabilities, as well as how exactly do you play Imbibitor Lunae, right? So without further ado, let's get into today's content. Imbibitor Lunae's Eidolon 2 is currently the only Eidolon 2 that can increase the DPS damage potential by so much to the point where it is comparable to an Eidolon 6 for other DPS units. The reason why this is the case is because with Eidolon 2, Imbibitor Lunae's action cycle has drastically changed, and so does his team compositions should players want to fully maximize his damage potential. So we will be exploring exactly what his Eidolon 2 does, the different playstyles, as well as the most optimal team composition. Now, the reason why Imbibitor Lunae's Eidolon 2 Imperium on Cloud 9 is so important, I'm just gonna let a CM bro explain this for me, and as usual, I'll be providing the subtitles to the video below.
新魂啊，九游释放终结技后，隐约行动提前100%，并且额外获得一个专属战绩点。这个新魂的效果跟速伤大招的自来条一模一样，看起来好像多出了一次而已，但是这个新魂足以改变隐约的配对操作和玩法，并且光是这一个新魂的提升，就达到一众角色6新魂的提升。以0新魂为基准，2新魂相较于1新魂的理论提升达到了惊人的63%。他的2新魂和隔壁的雷神不一样，雷神是辅助的伤害水平起手，2新魂达到主 C 水准。而隐约是天生主 C 水准，2新魂提升幅度和其他角色的6新魂提升幅度一样大，就可惜后面几个新魂给的覆盖率实在有点低，导致最后隐约6新魂其实也没跟其他主 C 6新魂拉开差距。当然，现在6新魂理论输出第一也只能是他，毕竟底子好。前面我们说过了，隐约的大招多数情况下是用来帮忙保下线和帮助普攻叠增伤的，现在不一样，现在是一个具有自拉条效果的大招，带充能身之后，相当于隐约的出手次数每3动多一次，平均战绩点消耗减少了，但是战绩点压力更大了。这句话听起来好像有点反人类，但确实是这样子的。以前的隐约每4动有一个大招，就相当于4动里面就会有1动，隐约是自带2个专属战绩点的。那么这1动之前，辅助不必要给他留战绩点，辅助具有战绩点运营空间。而现在隐约每300行动值有一个大招，但大招产出的战绩点会瞬间被自己的自来条行动吃掉。所以相当于现在隐约的循环里是不存在哪一次行动前隐约自带专属战绩点的，因为刚产点就被吃掉，也就相当于辅助没有战绩点运营空间。如果想扩大辅助的战绩点运营空间的话，要么辅助高速套隐约圈多产几个战绩点，要么隐约某一次行动改成2阶强普或者小普攻。不过这样的话，隐约的充能循环又会出问题。如果你幸运的拥有一个布洛尼亚的话，你就可以把攻击神换成充能神，采用压 A 隐约 A 压1直接拉条，让隐约打一个3阶强普叠天赋，然后隐约大招吃满真伤，再进行一次自拉条，再打一个3阶强普，隐约能够在同一时间点直接打出吃满压战绩身上的3阶强化普攻和吃了压增伤、天赋增伤和战绩爆伤的大招，加一个空白 buff 的3阶强普，这个单点爆发，这个 DPS 是爆炸高的，瞬间对主目标单体出伤能够达到惊人的30万级以上。目前大世界除了仙舟6以外 ，BOSS 最高血量也就在30万左右。
Right, so after that video, I'm just gonna wrap it up really quickly to talk about its effects. So after using his ultimate, Imbibitor Lunae's action as advanced forward by 100% and gains 1 extra Squama Sacrosancta. Now the function is exactly the same as Su Shang's ultimate. It is not to be confused with Seele's Resurgence, where buff durations are fixed. Imbibitor Lunae's buffs, they are reduced on the following action from his ultimate, right? So for example, if you have Ting Yun's buff lasting 2 turns or Bronya's ultimate buff lasting 2 turns, Imbibitor Lunae will use up both turns after he does his 3 skill point enhanced attack into ultimate into 3 skill point enhanced attack. Right, that is number 1. Number 2, the extra Squama Sacrosancta basically guarantees a Fulgurant Leap, which I'll be labeling it as 3-8, right? The 3 skill point enhanced attack following his ultimate. Very rarely will players not use this Fulgurant Leap after his ultimate, since our buff stacking will take place before Imbibitor Lunae takes action. So what do I mean by this is, usually to maximize Imbibitor Lunae's damage potential, you do want to stack on as many buffs as possible, right? Ting Yun's buff, Bronya's buffs, Yukong's buff, all onto Imbibitor Imbibitor Lunae before he uses 3A into ultimate into 3A, right? So this will grant him the maximum possible damage. So since he already have the buffs from the previous state, it doesn't make sense for players to not use this 3A attack following his ultimate, right? So that's that. Now the question is, how do we ensure that this combo of 3A into ultimate into 3A deals the maximum possible damage? So the build for E2 Imbibitor Lunae is gonna be split into two, right? One is the highest possible damage and one is the easiest skill point management. And there really is only one difference between both, which is you either use an attack rope or an energy regeneration rope, right? Everything else is the same. You want to run crit damage chest, attack percentage boots, and imaginary damage sphere. And then you want to be running 2-piece musketeer with 2-piece banditry with 2-piece rooted arena. For the reasons why this is the case, kindly check out my previous video for CN unit analysis in Imbibitor Lunae. Now, talking a little bit more about each respective build, let's talk about highest possible damage first, right? So the difference is we use our attack rope, which is a 43.2% attack, and this is roughly equivalent to 10% increased final damage output. And this damage is compounded by the amount of bars for Imbibitor Lunae as well as the D-bars on the enemy. Now, due to E2 Imbibitor's extreme burst potential of 1720% damage multiplier on 2 3A attacks and 580% damage multiplier for one ultimate, it combines to a total 2300% damage multiplier, right? 1800% for the main target and 250% times 2 for the adjacent target. So because of this incredibly high multiplier, it is very possible to one-pun the enemy. Now, one-pun is a term which basically means one punch or one hit kill the enemy unit without doing anything else. For Imbibitor Lunae, it's not exactly one hit, it is more like one combo, right? For one combo with 3A into out into 3A, it is very likely that you can just straight up kill the enemy with this single combo, which therefore removes the need for our ER rope to increase our ultimate usage. There's no point using our ultimate more if the enemy is already dead, right? Furthermore, even if this combo does not kill the enemy should be extremely low for Imbibitor Lunae to just straight up finish up the enemy in the following turn. But the bottom line is though, this build, the highest possible damage build, it is only recommended for players with a well-built Imbibitor as well as his relevant supports, right? You have his E6 Yukong, you have your Bronya and all that kind of stuff. If your Imbibitor Lunae is simply not dealing enough damage, be it his own relics quality are not good enough or his support is not good enough, then I will refer players to the alternative build, which is the easiest skill point management, right? So instead of using an attack percentage rope, we just simply switch to an ER rope, right? With ER rope, Imbibitor Lunae guarantees a 3-turn ultimate, even without his signature light cone. And with this ER rope, it is also possible to 2-turn or even 1-turn ultimate with Imbibitor Lunae as long as it has skills or you pair him up with Ting Yun. Now, this build is meant for players that are unable to kill the target using a single combo, right? The 3A into out into 3A cycle. If we're unable to do this, it is very likely that we'll run into skill point issues later on into the game. So using ER rope will increase the ultimate usage greatly, and this will reduce E2 Imbibitor Lunae's skill point demand. Now, due to action values advance, as mentioned by the CM bros just now, the Squama Synchro Sector will and should be immediately used following his ultimate. This means that our E2 Imbibitor Lunae will not hold the Squama Synchro Sector for the following turn, right? They will be immediately used, so we will have a greater skill point deficit for the team to boost Imbibitor Lunae's damage output. If we're not doing 3A attacks, which is to say, if you want to save for next turn, then you're really wasting the whole purpose of Eidolon 2, right? The entire purpose of Eidolon 2 is just make sure that he does even more 3A attacks. So because of this, to combat the greater skill point deficit for the entire team, more ultimate usage will directly translate into more 3A attacks, right? Because it essentially gives you one for free. So this will reduce his team's skill point generation pressure, right? Bottom line is, for this build, it is recommended for players who cannot one-pun the target due to weaker relic quality on Imbibitor Lunae or the rest of his support team. Bottom line, or rather a summary, highest possible damage will actually be the ideal build, I would say, as long as you can one-pun the target. Then the easiest skill point management build is meant for players who do not have their relics for Imbibitor Lunae at that caliber yet. Now, moving on to E2 Imbibitor Lunae's team composition, we have two different possible teams, but you guys can see over here, I only showed you guys one with the support, right?
What about sustain?
because like I said earlier on in my team composition video, ideally he want to be run with Luocha because that is his best in slot, because Luocha is the most skill point friendly sustain unit. But in the event that players do not have Luocha, you can simply just use any sustain unit and they pretty much work out to be the same. So I'll only be talking about the remaining 2 members after minusing Imbibitor himself as well as his sustain. For the highest possible damage, we do want to run Imbibitor Lunae with Bronya and E6 Yukong. And then for the other one, which is the easiest skill point management, that we do want to run Imbibitor Lunae with Tingyun and Pella. Now with that being said, keep in mind that the team composition is very flexible. It is not like a very hard requirement that you have to use these units for Imbibitor Lunae. This is meant to be an example for players to consider when they first want to build out Imbibitor Lunae. If you want to use Tingyun with Yukong, if you want to use Pella with Bronya, right? Or even if you want to use Asta or even Silver Wolf, feel free to go ahead as long as you follow the fundamental team building principle, which I have mentioned in my previous video for Imbibitor Lunae's team composition, right? These 2 teams that I show over here is the very bare bones sample team that anybody can just straight away pick up and enjoy the benefits. So I'll be first talking about the highest possible damage team, which is gonna be with Bronya and the E6 Yukong, right? These 2 supports paired up with Imbibitor Lunae creates the biggest damage numbers in Honkai Star Rail as of version 1.3 with Imbibitor Lunae's 3A into out into 3A. This is also the most consistent team to 0-turn clear endgame content even with a sustain unit, right? I'm pretty sure we've seen a lot of videos where players do a 0-turn clear using 3 supports and 1 hyper carry, but this team, because of the damage that Imbibitor Lunae is doing, you can still very comfortably do a 0-turn clear even with a sustain on your team. It's just that much damage, right? So that is that. That being said though, Yukong must be at E6. Once Yukong is at E6, she easily becomes the best support for E2 Imbibitor Lunae. Why? Because E2 Imbibitor can make full use of Yukong's 2 roaring bowstring stacks, and without E6, Yukong will face an issue where she needs to be speed tuned to Imbibitor Lunae, and you might not have enough stacks to make sure that Imbibitor Lunae gains the full benefit from her ultimate as well as her skill. E6 greatly reduces the skill point usage for Yukong because what she can do is just essentially constantly use her auto attacks. You don't use the skill at all, and only when you reach the final boss, then you use her ultimate, as you have seen from my previous video where I used E6 Yukong for Imbibitor Lunae clear, right? Even though that was easier, but the principle is exactly the same. You want to save Yukong's ultimate for the final boss, and before then you can just keep using her as an auto attacker, right? And this can only work if you have an E6 Yukong, so keep in mind. Why Bronya is here is because Bronya's ultimate buff lasts for 2 turns, and this also covers the entire 3A into out into 3A. Same as Yukong's 2 roaring bowstring stacks. Furthermore, Bronya's extra turn as well as damage percentage buff also greatly increases Imbibitor Lunae's 3A and out damage. It won't cover the second 3A unless you have an E6 Bronya, but this extra turn as well as all the buffs that she provides will greatly enhance Imbibitor Lunae's final damage output, and this will be the highest possible damage team that you can run with E2 Imbibitor Lunae. Now moving on to the second team is gonna be the easiest skill point management team, where you basically run Tingyun and Pella. This team has a much lower barrier to entry because you don't really need that much investment. Even if Pella and Tingyun are at E0, even if your Imbibitor Lunae has very terrible relics, this comp can still make it work. In fact, this comp is also the go-to comp for E0 Imbibitor Lunae, especially for newcomers that just entered the game without any good relics. Now with this team, Imbibitor Lunae can consistently cast 3A every single turn, ensuring that the damage output is still relatively high, even though his damage is not high enough to the point where he can one-pun the enemy units. Tingyun, even at less than E6, it offers roughly the same amount of energy as 3A, right? Because 50 energy is from Tingyun's ultimate and you get 40 energy from 3A. So because of this, you essentially save an extra turn to cast Imbibitor Lunae's out 1 turn earlier, and this will enable even more extra turns for E2 Imbibitor Lunae to trigger more of his 3A attacks. Pella, like I mentioned previously, she is the most skill point positive unit that we have now in Honkai Star Rail, so it will enable our Imbibitor Lunae to use his 3A attack even without ultimate, right? Tingyun to increase Imbibitor Lunae's ultimate frequency, Pella to ensure that Imbibitor Lunae can still cast his 3A every single turn. So this would be the easiest skill point management team, and I'll say it will do a much better performance if your team's relic development, especially for Imbibitor Lunae, is not there yet. Now for the summary, without a doubt, Imbibitor Lunae's Eidolon 2 is the best Eidolon in the game. And I don't say this lightly, right? My channel, I really don't say something is the best of the best of the best unless I absolutely believe in it. And for me, I absolutely believe in the fact that Imbibitor Lunae's Eidolon 2 is the best Eidolon in the game, even if you compare it to Eidolon 6. Right, coupled with the fact that he is also our strongest DPS in every single possible scenario, be it single target, 2 targets or 3 targets, Imbibitor Lunae's DPS is just straight up blowing all the DPS out of the water at the moment, right? So combining this, players investing in Imbibitor Lunae's E2 can deal an extreme amount of damage with 3A out 3A to the point where you can just straight up ignore elemental weaknesses and just clear the game from that. That being said, Imbibitor Lunae is so strong that he is perfectly viable at E0, right? He is more than enough to clear the endgame content with relative ease as compared to all other DPS we have right now. E2 is really meant for players who want to use him in the long run, right? Because having his E2 will reduce the likelihood of getting power creep in the future. And what I mean by power creep is, in the future, if there comes another extremely high multiplier DPS, which is something like Imbibitor Lunae, at least Imbibitor Lunae's E2 straight up doubles or almost doubles his final damage output, right? So this will make him a little bit more future-proof once you get his Eidolons. And this kind of goes into all the other units we have. The more Eidolons a unit have, the more future-proof they get. However, since Honkai Stadio does not have any competitive element, this future-proof point is not that important because at the end of the day, you can clear MOC with any unit you want, right? This point for future-proofness or meta is really only meant for meta chasers, or if you guys are participants of any community events such as the one that's hosted by Timaeus, the PvP Cup, then maybe it will have a little bit more impact when there's competitive elements involved. Other than this, if you just want to clear Honkai Stadio as a single player PvE game, then there really is no need to consider this at all. For me personally, I really prefer the highest damage team because I am in a stage where I can one-pan most content in the game right now. I don't really need to manage my skill point that much because there's no point if I increase my ultimate frequency if everybody is just gonna die, right? But I can understand for newer players, especially for players that just picked up the game like maybe last week or when Imbibitor Lunae just came out, then you guys might need to consider using the easier skill point management team if you have his Eidolon 2. And with that, we have come to the end of today's content. If you guys have any discussions, feel free to check out my Discord, Pokke's Village, where we have a very active community discussing about Honkai Stadio on a daily basis. And if you guys want to check out my stream, that's going to be twitch.tv/MrPokke. And the schedule for the stream is posted in my Discord every single week. So that's all I have for today, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.